speaker and hypnotherapist, hypnotist, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you. Thanks, kid. Thanks so much. Thank you. Hey, good afternoon. Let's try that again. Good afternoon. Yeah, really. This is the 17th year since Miss Gilbert first contacted me to be a speaker at her AP class. I believe, if memory serves, it was 2002. And Tony, would you mind coming in and speaking to my group, do something, maybe a hypnosis demonstration? And I did for about 20 kids. And then she said, next year, would you mind if we joined a couple other, and it evolved eventually into this. I missed 1 year due to illness, but it was 17 years ago that I first spoke for Miss Gilbert. And Miss Gilbert it's the only high school group in my entire career as a corporate speaker. Her group is the only corporate group, only high school group rather, that I've ever spoken to. People see these, any of you see these YouTube videos? A couple of these videos have over 1 million hits. You guys are famous. 1 million people have seen those videos. And would any of you care to venture a guess as to what the most common comment is when they see it? Fake, actors, paid, fake, he paid people to do that, fake. It's unbelievable how many people do not believe what they're seeing with their own eyes. I mean, some pretty interesting things have happened up on this stage. But I want to take a minute before I even begin, and I want you folks to understand that this is all due to Miss Gilbert. Every year, come July or something, I get an email that is titled, "It's that time of the year again," and she wants to know when I'm available or if I'm available, and she sets it up, and she makes it happen, and she organizes it, and she does it because she wants you folks to see this. She wants you folks to understand a little bit something different that most people don't get an opportunity to see. So if you do like it, please don't be shy. Make sure you let her know because she really does put herself out to make it happen. And I have been doing this for 16 out of 17 years. How many of you in this room, if you don't mind me asking, are 17 years old or younger? Can I see by show of hands? Oh, God. I mean, that means when I started doing this, you weren't even born. Think about that. When I did her first program, that you did not even exist, and here you are as amazing, vibrant young adults. And I want to point out a couple things. First of all, it was 17 years ago that I first spoke for Miss Gilbert. It seems like it was a half hour ago. What happens to you, time starts to distort as you get older. It doesn't seem that much long ago that I did my first presentation for Miss Gilbert. You were not even born. And yet here you are as vibrant young adults. And I call you young adults for a reason. I'm here today. Today is 1 day after the anniversary of that horrible tragedy at Parkland, right down the road. What is that, 15, 20 miles from here? Right down the road. And last year when I came in, it was the day after the actual tragedy had occurred. And I got an opportunity to sit and speak with a few of you, and it just amazed me. Your poise, your maturity, your confidence, your awareness of your environment was absolutely impressive to me, and I can only tell you that at your age, I was nowhere near, none of my friends or my generation was nowhere near as centered as you are. And then when I saw the kids from that tragedy on TV and the way they handled it and the way they were able to communicate their feelings, you are an awesome group of people. You truly are an awesome group of people. You are. I've got 2 girls at home. They're 14 and 15, and they are awesome, and they bring their friends into the house occasionally, and I'll see that you're just an amazing generation. I've been doing this now for 17 years, and a couple of my presentations were somewhat negative. I was worried about what was going on in the world and how split we were as a nation and how overpopulation. And some of it was communicated in my message. You guys are turning me around. You guys are going to do it. I absolutely believe you will be the generation that saves the world. You're going to make it happen. And the evidence is all over. There is a book that was published last Friday. I have not read it, but I did read the reviews, and I did see 2 interviews with the authors. 2 authors questioned a basic premise that overpopulation is going to be catastrophic. See, when I was born, the day I was born, there were 2.5 million people, 2.5 billion people on the planet. Do any of you know how many people are on the planet today? 7.7, right, almost 8. 3 times. It took 250,000 years to get to 2.5 billion and 1 lifetime to triple it. And the projections were that that's going to keep happening. And the tipping point, they claim, is going to be I believe it was 12 billion. It's going to be when it all falls apart. That was everybody's assumption. We're headed toward a real cataclysmic, terrible thing. Well, these two researchers wanted to know what the evidence of that was. And it turns out there is no evidence. They were just using numbers. Well, if it went from 2 to 3, when it came 4, it's going to keep going like that, and at this date, it's going to be 12. And they went out into the field. They went all over the world trying to find evidence of this population explosion. And there were a number of things they found, but the overriding conclusion of this book is the following. Everywhere they went, the poorest countries in Africa, the most populated in India and Pakistan, the Middle East, where you'd see essentially people living in slums and in really terrible conditions, they'd see the pocket light up, and the individual would pull out a smartphone. And they recognized that a majority of the women in the world are communicating with the world now. They're getting educated. And anytime you see an educated woman, you see lower overall birth rates. Because as they educate themselves as to what their choices are and what they can and cannot do and how it works, you have lower birth rates because women stop having babies that they either cannot afford or do not want. Birth rates start dropping. And their predictions are based on the facts, and wouldn't you know it, it's going to be educated women that save the world. What a shock. You guys are probably going to be the ones that ultimately turn it all around. And then you read in the newspaper about how difficult it must be to be a kid or a teenager or a young adult in this horribly split country. These are not normal times. The country is so split politically, and there's so much animosity. How are we ever going to survive? You've heard that kind of talk, that kind of chatter in the background. I was a sophomore in high school in 1968. Any of you who do your recent American history, Google it. 1968 was generally acknowledged as one of the worst years in American history ever. Everything went wrong. 68 was the worst year ever. It started out with the Russians invading Czechoslovakia, and we were talking about going to war with the Russians. Ring a bell? Yeah, and then along comes April. Martin Luther King is assassinated. Horrific. A month or two later, Bobby Kennedy is assassinated. Rioting all the major cities. The convention, the political conventions, people are being shot. The students are protesting. Every time you turned around that year, it was like, we're falling apart. This country's going to pieces. And if you just Google it, that's the general consensus. They all acknowledge 1968 was this horrific year. Just everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And it was scary. I was a sophomore in high school. I remember I was aware of the adults being afraid. They made me afraid. And what was so weird, that year, 1968, NASA, at the very end of the year, decides to send Apollo 8 to the moon. Now, man had never left Earth orbit. Apollo 8 is the very first craft that left the orbit of the Earth, actually went to the moon. They didn't land, but they circled the moon. That was Apollo 8. And the astronauts made it to the moon on Christmas Eve, of all days. So after this unbelievably bad year, Christmas Eve, everybody sits around, the whole world turns on their TV sets, and here are these astronauts circling the moon, and you can see the Earth in the background, and they read from Genesis. And God said, "Let there be light." And they ended, I hate choking up. They ended it by saying, God bless the good Earth, and God bless you all. And that was the way that horrible year ended, and then it started turning around. And all of a sudden, we still had some rough spots. We had Nixon, we had a couple other things that happened, but it started turning around, and we made it, here I am, 40, 50 years later, 50 years later, God, that's scary. 50 years later, it's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. We made it, and you guys are going to make it. So don't let all that talk and all that chatter. This is a really young country, and we're an experiment. This idea of immigrants coming to a place and creating a democracy is unheard of in history. We are still an experiment. We are a young country. We've got a lot of growing pains still to go, but we're going to make it. We're the great experiment, and or as Bill Clinton once quoted, anyone who bet against America lost money. I foresee a bright future for you folks, and I am thrilled for you. I can't wait to see what you see. The sad part is I'm not going to see it. I'm another generation. I was born in an analog world. You guys are the first group in a digital world. I have children, and I believe in young people, and one of my favorite pieces of prose talks about children in a really interesting way. And I'd like to share it with you if you don't mind. The prose is real simple. It says, your children are not your children. They come through you, but not from you. You can house their bodies, but you cannot house their souls. For their souls reside in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You are yesterday's answer. That part always pissed me off. But I'm encouraged for you. You guys are going to have such an amazing, such an interesting, such a fascinating life. And I am coming to the end of my career, and you folks have it all ahead of you. And people in my position, can't help themselves. Old white men always have to give advice. So at this point, this old white guy's going to give me some advice. But I'm going to give you some advice. And if, from my particular and unusual point of view, I'd like to share with you some advice. Number one, in your upcoming journey, which is going to be amazing, you'll see things that I can't even dream about. As you travel this amazing journey, number one, if you can travel, when you have the opportunity to travel, see the world. It's an amazing place. Part of my job, I have been to every state in this country multiple times, including North Dakota, and that's not easy to do. There's nothing happening in North Dakota except oil fields. But I've been to every state in this country multiple times as part of my job as a speaker. The country's remarkable. The country's amazing. People in this country are wonderful. Every state, every city has something to see. And every time I would see something new or different or interesting, it would change the way I saw the world, change my perspective. I spent living in Hawaii for 2 years. If you're going to travel somewhere, go to the big island of Hawaii, go to Volcanoes National Park, walk out and stand before an active volcano and watch the lava flow past you. It's called the drive-in volcano. When the flows are flowing, they'll actually build a boardwalk. You can walk right up to it. Feel the heat, feeling the ground rumble. Feel that primal sense of that coming out of the center of the earth. It'll change the way you think. If you go to South Dakota, definitely, go see Mount Rushmore. If you are in Florida, go down at least once in your life. Go to Key West and sit there and watch the sunset on Monroe Pier. Hundreds of people do it every night, and when the sun goes all the way down until it disappears, everybody breaks out into applause. It's just a really cool moment. Now, I've been to many countries, a couple of dozen countries. Go to Rome. The Colosseum's still there. Go to the Colosseum. Go to the Forum. Go to Istanbul. Go to Singapore. I've been many different places in the world. Every place, Britain is just awesome. Go to Whitehall Chapel. Go to these places that are famous and stand before it. I've been to Cairo twice. You cannot stand at the foot of the pyramid at Giza and look up and not be changed. How did they do this? It's just mind-bending. Go to Luxor, climb 1/8 of a mile down into solid rock until you get to the sarcophagus. Every inch of that 1/8 of a mile painted beautifully, hand dug out of rock, and you stand in front of that sarcophagus. How did these people do this? It's amazing. It changes your perspective. If you can travel, travel. Don't wait until you've retired and 65 and you're going to travel the world. You won't appreciate it. The more you have different perspectives, the wider your field of view, the more you will take in and the more you will absorb in this amazing world. And it truly is an amazing world. And I'm going to mention just 3 other things that I did. Walk to the top of the pyramids at Chichen Itza, the Mayan pyramids in the peninsula of Mexico. 2, when I was younger, I walked to the top of the Statue of Liberty, up into the torch. And 3, I got on an elevator once in Tower 1 of the World Trade Center and went all the way up to the top of the observation tower. Awesome sight. The reason I mention those 3 things, you can't do that anymore. The tower's gone. They blocked off the Statue of Liberty, and they stopped people from walking on the Chichen Itza pyramids because we were killing it. We were wearing it down. In other words, if you get an opportunity, don't wait till you're 65 to do it. Some of the things you can do now won't be there when you're ready for them. That's number 1. Number 2, if you can, learn to love mathematics. All I can tell you, the universal language. The more you understand about mathematics, the more you will understand the whole world. Mathematics will explain so much more to you than words or any other field could ever explain. So if you can, learn to like mathematics. If you can't, at least do this. Understand the bell curve. Sit down one night, look up the central limit theorem, bell curve, normal distribution, understand the bell curve. In my life, a couple of hundred times, I have understood something because I understood the central limit tendency. And what the central limit tendency basically says is that anytime you have a large number of events, you're going to get a bell curve. 68% of them are going to be average, 5 to 15% above average, all the way up to about 2.14% that are infinitely high, 5 to 15% that are lower, all at 2.14%, non-existent. Understanding that in life in so many different ways, what's happening, my life's not going right, it's going wrong. There's an average to everything. There is an average to everything. And understanding that concept will help you understand the low points and explain to you the high points. Because this is the way things go in life, no matter what you're doing. But it always bends toward the mean. And if you understand what the mean is, it points you in the right direction. It gives you control. And the third thing, write some goals on a piece of paper. Let your imagination go crazy. If you could pull the strings, if you were in complete and total control of your own life, which, by the way, you are, if you lived in a country where you could do anything you wanted to do, which, by the way, you do, you represent like 0.00001% of the world's population that can do that. If you had total freedom, could do and be anything you want to be, what would you want to be? Use your imagination. Write it down on a piece of paper today. I'll tell you why. There's a famous study, Princeton, 20-year reunion. All right, at this 20-year reunion, how many of you guys had written goals when you were in college? 2% had a piece of paper, written goals. I wrote my goals down in college. That 2% controlled over 80% of the total net worth of that group. Point being, knowing where you want to go tends to increase the likelihood that you get there dramatically. Think about it this way. A cruise ship leaves the port of Miami. It has a goal. It wants to go to the Bahamas. They set the navigational gear. The boat goes to the Bahamas, right? Same boat goes out of Port of Miami, does not have a goal. It just goes. What's likely to happen? It's probably going to go out and go until it runs out of fuel. Or if they're heading out of the Port of Miami and they go straight, they're going to crash into Cuba, which is exactly where they don't want to be. Think about it. Write some goals down. Travel if you can. Understand mathematics. If not, at least the bell curve. I'm telling you, it'll make a difference. And in your life, and then I'll move on to more interesting stuff. Well, one last comment, and I'll move on, I promise. In your life, you are very likely to hear 2 phrases or statements, probably a dozen or so times in your life. Many of you probably already heard it, but you're probably going to hear it about a dozen times in your life. Here's the first phrase you're likely to hear. Youth is wasted on the young. Any of you ever hear that? Youth is wasted on the young? You're going to hear that about a dozen times in your life, I promise you. I don't know where or how or what the circumstance, but you're going to hear that phrase, youth is wasted on the young. Here's another phrase you're going to hear. If I knew then what I know now. You're going to hear that about a dozen times in your life. Now, if you don't think God has a sense of humor, I promise you now, try to remember this moment, because I promise you this. Sometime in the future, probably many years from now, you're going to say, I finally understand what that means. Youth is wasted on the young. Oh, I see what that means now. And it'll be too late. That's the joke. The minute you realize it, oh, geez, I'm 50, I'm 60, it's over. You don't realize that youth is wasted on the young until you're not a youth anymore. But you will hear that at least a dozen times, each of those phrases, and there will come a moment in your life where it dawns on you. It's like a light going off. Oh, that's what that meant. And realize somebody's playing with you. That's got to be just a sense of humor out there somewhere in the great unknown. So that being said, your class, this class, is about altered states, correct? Which begs the question of, what is a mental state? This is normal mental state, altered state, correct? What's a mental state?